It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by AgileDad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. It's time for another question of the day that we get all the time. Yesterday, we really had a good time talking about leadership and leadership attributes. Today, we're going to talk about t-shirt sizing. I got an email from someone that said, should we use t-shirt sizing instead of story points? And they went on an email. That's a long email, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But they went on to explain that the problems come up if they try to map story points with time. Kind of interesting because this is something that I've been proclaiming for ages now, and it's finally starting to get its place in a limelight, right? That when you start comparing story points to time, it leads to some really interesting failing points. The first thing is you find that during planning poker, you're going to have a lot of conflict. So if you're doing planning poker, you're going to have conflict because everyone's trying to do time-based estimates and measure time-based estimates. And every developer, of course, is going to say it takes a different amount of time to build things, instead of focusing around how to improve a shared understanding of the backlog item itself. The second problem is it becomes difficult to know how much work the team can actually consume or how much they're actually getting done each sprint, because the size of the work doesn't necessarily reflect the size. It's just an estimate. And, they argue that time does reflect that, but then time's based on the individual who's doing the work. So here we are. I couldn't think of a better way to describe that's a flawed process. I might steal what's in this email and use it in some of my training because this is right on point. Yes, it's exactly what we teach in class. So, while some teams are okay with these types of problems and they try to find ways to hash it out by doing an average time per story point across the amount of time based on the developer skills that are working in that sprint, and I mean, by the time you reverse engineer the formula that they use to figure out, how much time a story point equals, you have to refigure it out because you've just spent that much time figuring out how much time the story point equals. It's almost like you have to apply story points to the method of figuring it out, which I know sounds silly, but you get where I'm going with this, right? It's just so time consuming. So this person went on to say, we started using t-shirt sizes with some success, which I'm happy to hear. But then they kind of took it in a different direction than I would have. Okay. So they went on to say that they try to stay away from the Fibonacci sequence because when they use numbers, the people automatically assume a number equals something. Guess what? I'm still good. I agree. I think the second you say something's a number, people are going to come back and say, 3 what or 5 what, right? So the Fibonacci sequence is going to be interesting, right? So he says, then we've gone and said, just use the t-shirt sizes. But then we say extra small automatically becomes a 1 or 2. Small becomes a 3. Medium becomes a 5. Large becomes a 13. And extra large becomes a 20. Okay. Here's where I kind of go, If someone says something is a 13 and they're just a little bit off, not a bunch, a little bit off, and it's actually a 20, that's a 7-point swing. When you're talking about 7-point swings in Agile, that could potentially be 4 extra small stories in this case, or 2 smalls and an extra small. I think you get where I'm going with this, right? It's just there's too much, variability between the numbers. I always stay on the low end of the spectrum when you're trying to map them together. And I say an extra small is 1, a small is 2, a medium's 3, a large is 5, and an extra large is 8, because that puts those close enough together that it allows you to get a forecast that makes more sense because you're not trying to be so far out there. So somebody makes a mistake and they say something small when it's really medium, you're only losing a point. And a point could equal 1 additional story, but it's okay. I'd rather err on the side of caution of saying, this is what we can do with confidence versus, we're going to say this is a 20 instead of a 13 and being 7 points off, which could be a whole litany of things that work that could potentially be done that now is not going to be done because of the way we did our estimation. So I think it's important to stay on the low end of the scale. So another comment that I have here, which is interesting, and this wasn't brought up in the email, is a lot of times I tell people if they're getting confused about the numbers and they try to use, broader spectrum, instead use something different, like a dog size or a dinosaur size or, a tree size. I don't know, whatever it is to you, a mountain peak height. Whatever it is you're familiar with as a team, pick something that's common knowledge for the whole team and use that as your measurement. I tell my class I taught a group from the Baptist Theological Seminary, and they would use books from the Bible as their, different sizes. That looks more like a Leviticus than a Numbers to me, and it confused me to no end. But I think you get where I'm going with this, right? Because not everybody knows exactly how long each book of the Bible is. But as long as you're using something that the core team is comfortable with and they're familiar with, and it doesn't relate directly to a number, you should be good to go, right? And then you can always tie it back to the story points as long as you use the low end of the spectrum. Because when you start getting too high up there, the degree of separation becomes so large that it forces you to consider things that you might not have considered any other way. So I hope this was helpful for you. Keep it short and sweet today. If you have questions or a topic you want us to cover, reach out to us, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear more about your topic. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.